Our second edition of afternoon off-season ship chasing is about to get underway. And today, Pat and I are going to take a little stroll through these mock drafts. The Super Bowl hasn't even happened yet, but we have a flood of mock drafts here. And there's a lot of fun fantasy implications for thinking through if some of these landing spots are correct. Some of them are wild. Like you might have seen Ashton Jeanty projected to the New York Jets with a top 10 overall pick. That would certainly flip the fantasy landscape on its head. So we're going to go through all of these and discuss the potential fallout if some of these come true. I'm Pete, today with Pat. This is Ship Chasing. Let's do it.
Pat Fryer Helmo.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight.
Jamar. Alpha play chase.
Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally piss boys. You're
right. All right. Bindle's asking a question that I see Matt Harmon mogging Neighbors in that video. I have not seen a Matt Harmon Malik Neighbors video. Have you?
No, I have not. No.
Okay. I did know that he was at the Super Bowl, and I saw some posts with him talking to receivers, but I missed this. Did you see Fantasy Life is there, and Kendall Valenzuela from Fantasy Life did a segment with Dylan Lowby, and he tried his first beignet. And I wanted to quote retweet it and say, this is my favorite piece of fantasy
with Dylan Lowby
crossover content I've ever seen.
That would be very good.
I will say this. I did notice this. Matt Harmon was looking pretty jacked up.
I saw he was on some panel, and I thought the same thing. Harmon looking good.
This was the other one that was just today. So, Cooter Doodle lives in New Orleans. Obviously, she came on the show whenever the Saints play. She got to do a radio hit on XM with Rashid Shaheed. And then he signed the 3 jerseys that are behind her.
Wow. That's amazing. Congrats to Cooter Doodle.
Let me pull up that photo here. That's like making dreams come true.
Seriously, that's great.
Yes, here she was. Got to do Radio Row there. There's Ronas Kendall and then Shaheed and Cooter Doodle in the middle. And then her explaining to him why she has 3 jerseys. I hope the shipcast was mentioned. I should play this.
I don't know if she specifically said the shipcast. That would say that we're like that's like plus 500 that we got name checked. I certainly hope so.
So good. All right. So like I said, goal for today. I still have yet to do my first big board draft. I think I'm getting there, Pat. I think I'm getting there. Monday, I'm going to do a portfolio review after the Super Bowl. I think the following Monday, I'll launch Best Ball Breakfast. But where are you at in the drafting street so far?
I've done around 20 big boards. We got to have, the rankings have been live since the Monday. We dialed them in during the conference championship games. Thanks for that, Underdog. And then we launched them the Monday. So yeah, we're I think I'm about 20 drafts in or so. But I'm trying at this point. I kind of have like a good sense of what things, where things are. So I'm not doing like one a day right now. I'm kind of actually trying to space it out a little bit and let it breathe. But yeah, you got to pop in every few days. I feel like to get a good sense of the ADP movement.
Yeah, so there actually is a pretty good amount of movement on ADPs right now.
There is, because the initial ADPs were not, they're just like plugged in values. And so some of them got corrected very quickly, but some did not and are like more slowly moving. And then some rookies are starting to move around too. And then there's like kind of the pockets of the draft element, like where do you draft players, quarterback. People are drafting quarterback pretty aggressively right now. And so that's like something you kind of always got to keep in mind. But it's weird where like I'm starting to notice some of the elite quarterbacks falling a little bit, like Jalen Hurts in the 5th type stuff. And then you're like, oh, quarterbacks are devalued. But then if you like don't take a stacked quarterback in the 8th ahead of ADP, you're like, I'm boxed out. Like, how did that happen? So it's getting a feel for like where players and pockets tend to go.
I'm surprised that just your specific Jalen Hurts anecdote, in that I always think the recency bias and stuff has a big effect on things. I'm like, we just watched Jalen Hurts go absolutely nuts in the conference championship game, and he's playing in the Super Bowl. You'd think there'd be some like, yeah, let me grab some Jalen Hurts right now.
Totally. No, he's but I think part of it is that there's a lot of interesting players like in that like elite quarterback range. You know, like running backs, wide receivers, where you're like, man, I'm going to skip quarterback. I'm going to wait. And there's like that. There's a big group of quarterbacks around pick like 80 to like 120, where you're like, I'll just grab like 2 or 3 of those guys. But the problem is that's everyone's plan. And so if you're not aggressive about it, you might only get one of them. And then you're like, I guess I'm like Justin Fields quarterback 3ing this, which, you know, is viable, but not like what I have planned going in.
I was actually just checking this for my own, knowing that I'm going to want to pile in at some point. I'll give the quick fill rates for everybody here. Big board's at 16%. Little board, which is $3.50 max, that's at 32%. Bigger board is $100 5 max, that's at 9.6%. The biggest board, 5.2%. Their $250 entry. And then the War Room is actually the one with the highest fill rate here, 4 entry max, $25. That one is up at 40% here. So it is crazy to think that like a 2025 pre-draft best ball contest could be almost 50% full before the Super Bowl is even played. That is a wild thing.
That is wild. That is genuinely wild. Yeah.
But I do like these contests. The mid stakes, smaller entry, and then instead of a $3.20 max, having a 50 max for the $3 is really nice for people just wanting to like scratch that itch, but not necessarily punt off a lot of money right now.
Charles asked when little board 2. Little board 1 isn't even close yet.
Raise your hand in the chat if you have already maxed the little board, that I will stage an intervention with you. This is a good question. I mean, Pat, I told Pat that I was going to be out there, but yeah, you should definitely swing by either to hang out with me when we go to the zoo or whatever, or at the underdog party for the dog.
Yeah, I that sounds good. I'm down.
I'll give you the info. Yeah, it's at I think the main party or watch party is at a place in PB. I think it's called the PB Shore Club or something. It looked like a pretty good spot.
Cool.
Yes. Okay. Pat, so for today, what we're going to do, I mentioned, starting to see some of these mock drafts, and I assume like, this is helpful in that too. It's like starting to dial in, projected draft capital. Is that how you guys at Leg Up are kind of thinking about these mock drafts as far as data points?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. It's helpful in 2 ways. I think it's helpful because so Daniel Raz just wrote an article for Leg Up and identifying the backfields most likely to add a backfield, and he has them kind of tiered out based on how much capital they have invested in the position and how much value they're kind of getting, in terms of efficiency and all that, like how good their backfield looks, and kind of combining those and saying like, okay, who's likely to draft a running back? So you've got these teams like the Vikings, who have Ty Chandler as the only running back under contract. The Raiders, who basically don't have anyone except, a guy eating beignets with fantasy life. We got the Cowboys, who Rico Dowdle's a free agent. PSA, Rico Dowdle's a free agent. He gets drafted like he's not. The Chiefs with like Pacheco just got kind of phased out. Maybe it's because he's hurt, but doesn't seem great when you get kind of phased out during a Super Bowl run. The Chargers, J.K. Dobbins also a free agent. The Browns, Nick Chubb's a free agent. They still have Ford under contract. The Broncos, Javonte Williams a free agent. So you get these backfields, and the easiest thing in the world is to go, okay, well, Jeanty's on the Cowboys, and Hampton's on the Raiders, and the Vikings draft Judkins, and we'll give like whatever. You just assign each of them the backs we want. Chiefs get Henderson. That seems fun. But that's not how it's actually going to go. Some team is going to draft a back that we don't want them to. And I think the mock drafts just like help you remember that. Like the gut punch you feel when you look at Lance Zierlein's mock draft where he's got Jeanty going to the Jets. I hope we don't get that one specifically, but we're going to receive body blows during the draft where these guys don't go to the obvious spots. So it's kind of nice. I like it when we see like off the wall ones like the Jets one, because it just kind of helps you keep the full range of outcomes in mind for the landing spots. But then, yeah, you're dialing in the draft capital, and it's kind of interesting. Like Jeremiah, I think his quote is that he does rankings with his eyes and mock drafts with his ears. And so you're kind of, the mock drafts are often kind of what these guys are hearing around the league about where these guys will go. So I think the mock drafts more than the big boards give you a sense of, you know, who might surprise, who's like making progress up boards. And we'll get to some guys later on where I think we're starting to see a bit of a drumbeat on one guy and really in particular. But yeah, I mean, Jeanty, kick off with him. You do have the off the wall landing spot here with the Jets. But it's nice to think through, like, what would that do? And man, it would really hurt Jeanty's year one projectable volume for sure, because Brees wouldn't just go away. But I think Jeanty would be the lead back by the end of the year. You know, he's like that level of prospect where I think even a Brees Hall, you know, in a situation where the Jets just spent the 7th overall pick on this guy, I think he's got a big role by the end of the year. And Brees Hall is probably like a 1B with pass catching element to his role by the end of the year. So there's like really very few spots where you feel like Jeanty's not like a solid mid-round value. Obviously, drafting with the 1-2 turn, you're crushed if he goes to the Jets, but a lot of these other landing spots are like, I would draft him like the 105.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So if you are listening to this via audio, Pat put together some slides here. So we got some screenshots for each of these players and a bunch of their current mock draft placements. So we, of course, have referenced the Lancer line to the Jets. That was the most, you know, shock and awe one. Then you got a Cowboys, you got a Chargers, and 2 Denver Broncos here. Mel Kiper and Dane Brugler had him there. And I do think that is the best way to view this, of like, it's good to think about the range of outcomes, because like if you just tell yourself Jeanty to the Cowboys in every single draft and you're not thinking about, you know, him to the Jets and being like, well, maybe he's slow to get ramped up, maybe he's in a 50-50 timeshare for the first 10 weeks, like it's good to balance that range of outcomes.
Yeah, and I think I tend not to think that he will be drafted 1 to the Jets but 2 this high. And Robin pointing out that Brees probably gets traded in that scenario, which I agree that's probably what happens. But you're kind of waiting with bated breath for that trade to come through for both guys. But to Davis's point, more for Brees. You know, it's going to be worse for Brees that the incumbent who just has a generational running back prospect get drafted top 10 overall ahead of him. But a lot of the thing with Jeanty, I think, is like, as long as he doesn't go super high, the landing spots that then make sense start to look pretty good. And I would include stuff like the Bengals, you know, like if he goes to the Bengals, like, sorry, Chase Brown, like that was a nice year you had, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I think with this class, it's pretty deep with like interior offensive linemen, or like these like tweener tackle guards, or like project tackles who might move up on good combines and stuff. And there's a deep edge class. And the cornerback class is pretty solid. And just kind of deep on the defensive line generally. So I tend not to think that Jeanty goes this high to like 7. I think he's more likely to go in that kind of 12 to 22 range, right? And that's where you do have these like, oh my God, like these are the absolute nuts landing spots. So it's risky, you know, it's a rookie and we don't know where he's going to play, but I think Jeanty, where he's going, does have upside to move up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. Yeah, ADP 14.6 right now. He's sandwiched in between Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey. He's ahead of JT, Jacobs, Bucky, Brees, Chase Brown. Do you think that ADP is pretty efficient?
I do. Just an excellent running back prospect, versatile, catches passes. He's fast. I don't know if he's like 4.3s. He might be though, and I think he's 4.4s. Like he'll be sub 4.5. I feel confident about that. And he he's not, he just does everything. He's not like the tallest guy, but he's super fast and can play in all facets of the game. So yeah, you don't know for sure that he lands in an awesome spot, but if he does land, like to me, the Broncos would be incredible. Behind a great offensive line. The Chargers and the Cowboys, obviously, you have the Chargers would be really really good, but they're at 22. Maybe he doesn't get there, but the spots ahead of that are still mostly pretty strong. There's obviously some landmine spots for him that would make him more of like a third or fourth round value.
Seeing this question from Big One, what would you assign the probability that he is a first round pick? Because based on these mock drafts, it's looking pretty high.
I think he would have to pull a hammy or interview horribly, or some medical red flag comes up. He's pretty locked in. I think the bigger question is there another running back who goes first round rather than Jeanty falling out of the first? I haven't heard anything about Jeanty that would lead me to believe he doesn't go first round. The only thing would be teams aren't sure about spending a first on a running back. And after the year the free agent running back class just had, after the year Gibbs just had going first round unexpectedly, I don't think there's going to be a shortage of teams willing to take him in the 20s at the very least. So
yes,
and it's not impossible, but it does strike me as pretty unlikely. And honestly, if he did, he might go to the Bears in the second round. He might go to the Raiders in the second round, which could feel a lot better actually than it does now if they get the quarterback situation figured out and he's just the whole backfield. I honestly don't think it would change his value much, because this prospect as an early second round pick isn't that much worse. It's kind of the JT thing. Remember, JT was supposed to go first round. He falls to the early second. Okay, it's not really that even going to be that big of a deal.
Right. And maybe his ADP would slide like a half a round.
A little. Like half round, maybe.
But nothing meaningful. It is funny to see, and there was actually a conversation going on in the Ship Chasing Discord earlier today, which, by the way, if you guys happen to be new to the show, we do have a Discord. You become a YouTube member, and then you hop in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. There's a link down below. You sync your YouTube membership with your Discord account. There's instructions in the FAQ on how to do that. And then you will enter a beautiful, lovely place where we can debate Ashton Jeanty's fantasy value right now. But kind of talking about the shock of being wait, we're really taking this over Jonathan Taylor, who exploded in the fantasy playoffs, Josh Jacobs, who was this massive league winning running back. There is kind of that sticker shock. And yet it sounds like what I'm hearing from you and from a lot of people is that as a prospect, this is almost as good as it gets.
Yeah, he's Bijan tier prospect. Someone was saying, generational running back comes out every few years. I do think we're blessed to have recently Bijan Robinson come out. And I'm sorry, but this guy profiles as just as strong a prospect as Bijan Robinson. I think rightfully was held up as a generational prospect. But maybe he's a hair worse than Saquon was. But to me, it's CMC, if you're valuing the pass catching stuff, where he had 2.81 yards per route run in school, which is damn near twice as much as Barkley, Robinson, and Jeanty. So, with the pass catching stuff that CMC had, he was an amazing prospect. And then Barkley, Bijan, and Jeanty would be the guys. But I think he's a stronger prospect than Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, the Joe Mixon, Zeke, ETN, Fournette, Brees, Dalvin Cook. I think he's a stronger prospect than all those guys.
Yeah, it is funny because the Chargers and the Broncos seem like the sweet spot of realism, and then I do love just thinking of what we kind of got the jump scare early in that Jeanty go to the Jets at 7. That would be the equivalent of the Michael Penix pick, this year, where we're just all wait, what? And yet we know that shit can happen. So I do like seeing that there, and that Lance primed us for that. Let's head to
the Panthers would be another one where you're you could see, because they want to run the ball, and you're
that would be wild.
You just signed Chuba, you don't need to do this. Something like that could happen for sure. It's just good to remember that teams refuse to just be logical.
So now we have this kind of second tier of running backs. And I assume it's not a coincidence that they're lumped into other RBs, because it seems like what I keep hearing is that this is a deep class, but not necessarily super strong at the very top outside of Jeanty here. And kind of the questions you're posing as we go through some of these names are, will another one sneak into the first round? So maybe that debunks what I just said about it not being as strong at the top. And then who falls out of round 2? So how are you thinking about this next group?
Yeah, I do think that there's, there's this second tier of running backs, and it's not that they're not strong. But it's sort of like the strength comes in the fact that there's so many of them. They're all like, very strong kind of second tier prospects. But I don't think they're anywhere near Jeanty's level as prospects. Even if one of them goes in the first round, I still think there would be like a couple tiers between that guy and Jeanty. But they're good prospects. And you've got Travion Henderson, Amarian Hampton, Caleb Johnson, and Quinshawn Judkins as this 4-player tier that, I'd put like in kind of a Kenneth Walker zone, maybe a little better than a James Cook from a couple years ago. Kind of, like very good bet, but not like an absolute lock the way Jeanty looks like, or not even like a really, really strong bet. Like with Gibbs, his receiving profile was so good that you're like, yeah, he's a little undersized, but man, like if he's used traditionally, like he will be an absolute fantasy star. And these guys are a little bit more tilted to the early down stuff. Like Hampton is kind of more like the Montgomery to someone else's Gibbs, that kind of like hammer, but he looks like a very capable version of that. Caleb Johnson, similar, like he can handle a lot of touches, downhill runner. Judkins has some versatility, but kind of more, the bigger back. I mean, he was kind of the bigger back to Travion Henderson. Henderson is a little bit higher upside, I think, because he's going to be really, really fast. I think he'll test really well. There's some buzz that he could go first round. So he's one of the guys that you do wonder, like, could he actually sneak into the back half of the first round? And Caleb Johnson, in here you're seeing Brugler has him going to the Vikings at 24. There's been some buzz about him going to the first round. Hampton tends to be the first guy mocked, but not usually in the first round. But obviously, he would be live to go first round. I think Judkins is more of a second, maybe third round. He seems like the most likely to fall out of the third, but not like a lock to go fourth among these guys. But yeah, I mean, I think you're betting that these guys take a backfield over. Like they're kind of like a Mixon for the Texans type of situation, the Jacobs type of bet where you're like, they're not going to catch a ton of passes. It's not like they won't be zeros, but they're not going to be really dominant that way. But they're just like the guy on their team, and they're all in play to get drafted with enough capital, and then potentially in spots where they would pretty easily do that. I mean, pretty much all these landing spots are ones where you're like, damn, dude, like this guy would be pretty comfy click.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like every single one of these teams in this assortment up here, Vikings, Broncos, Raiders, Bears, Cowboys, Chiefs, Steelers, like every single one of them have ambiguity in a way that would immediately be able to tell yourself a story that they could take over that backfield in not too much time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it won't be this clean. Like these are the types of prospects where we do see busts. And so you probably want to factor in like one of these guys just like not being that good or dealing with injuries and then, not having that much juice this year or whatever. And then, another one might get stuck behind someone for too long. But I would say at least a couple of, 2 to 3 of these 4 backs are going to make some real noise this year. And they're not like prohibitively expensive. Hampton, you pay the biggest premium for. But Henderson, Johnson, and Judkins. Actually, Judkins is the guy I've been drafting the most because he's the cheapest.
Right.
But I'm happy to draft all of these guys right now.
What's interesting is they are very tightly clumped ADP wise here. I put the range up 59.1 through 76.1. So you mentioned Kenneth Walker. He comes off the board. Then Omarion is the next guy. It was funny that you used Montgomery as a comp because he's the next guy after
Yeah.
in ADP. And then you are just kind of ping ponging these rookies. The veterans in there would be James Conner, Tyrone Tracy. And then after Judkins and still the most bizarre ADP to me on the board, Isaiah Pacheco. And then you're into like Pollard and Aaron Jones. That feels like inefficient pricing as far as like what the upside is and obviously the downside.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the market's doing a good job of like it strikes me that Jeanty's in his own tier, and then you could say that Hampton, Henderson, and Johnson are kind of in their own tier, and then Judkins is in his own tier because of the draft capital. Like, it does feel like if one of these guys falls to round 3, it's most likely to be Judkins. And then you could start getting in a situation where teams like, whoa, this guy shouldn't be here. I know we don't need him, and that's never fun, he could get Zach Charbonnet, and that was obviously in the second round, but you could, Blake Corum, that kind of outcome. So, it makes sense that he's the cheapest, but I also think there's a good chance that he lands in one of these awesome landing spots in the second round. So at pick 76, I'm into taking him. Johnson and Henderson I like a little bit more than Hampton because you get about a 10 pick discount on those two guys. And I honestly think of the 3, Henderson is probably the most live to go round 1 because of how he's going to test. Like, you watch him play, you're like, there's no way this guy isn't going to run a fast 40. Like, he's like 205, 208, so he's got enough size, and he can catch the ball too. So I think that a team could kind of talk themselves into like, yeah, we're going to utilize him a little. He's not going to be like a workhorse for us, but we're going to utilize him in the passing game and for, try to get explosive play out of him. He only had 1.03 yards per route run, but that's like kind of where Brees was, and he ran a bunch of routes. So he could actually be, a better pro than he was a college player, and that non-workhorse usage could end up being still pretty valuable for fantasy. What if it's the Chiefs, but it's pick 32 instead of pick 64?
What percentage of your drafts would you say involve you selecting at least one of these guys because they are all clumped together in a similar range?
I don't know. That's a good question. Probably like a third, maybe the 40%.
Yeah,
maybe like a third.
I was guessing it was going to be high, just like me scanning these names. I mentioned some of the running backs. You got Mahomes in this range, and then you got like Debo, Jaden Reed, you got Luther Burden, Ridley, Ayuk. Like, just my eyes gravitating here. I'm kind of like, yeah, these rookie running backs seem kind of like the most interesting bets in this range.
So I've done 22 drafts, and I'm 18% Jeanty, 9% Hampton. Let's see. It looks like I haven't drafted Caleb Johnson yet, although I did draft him in an FFPC draft. That surprises me.
Oh, nice.
Henderson, I've drafted 9%, and Judkins, I've drafted 18%. So I need to get some more Johnson, who I like.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is the interesting thing, like, going back to some of the fill rates with these contests, right? Like, some of these, like the War Room, will end up being time boxed. Some of these are going to spill over post-combine, where the market is going to think about a lot of these guys in a much different way than they do right now, just based on some of those testing.
Yeah, I think there's going to be winners and losers from this group, which is, again, it's a good group of running backs, but just the nature of the beast is that there's probably going to be winners and losers from this group. So, if once I'm more like 122 drafts in instead of 22, I don't want to find that I'm like not drafting one of these guys. I think all of these guys are pretty well priced. They're somewhat similar to each other. Like Caleb Johnson, Omarion Hampton, Quinshon Judkins are kind of all similar-ish. And it's going to come down to like, what does an NFL team think about it? Something I can't predict, right? What does an NFL team think when they have the chance to draft one of these guys because of the way the board fell? Like, that's noisy as hell. So yeah. I don't want to get too overweight on any of these guys relative to the others.
Yeah. The landmine risk is pretty large there. All right. let's
I would
get.
also let me just
Go
float. I do think I didn't include, because with the mock drafts, most mock drafts are just round 1 right now, and there's only a few that are round 2. That's why you're seeing like a lot of Matt Miller and Dane Brugler on here, because those are the guys who had 2-round mock drafts that I could check out at this early stage. Neither of them had Devin Neal going second round, or Cam Scatabo, or Dylan Sampson. But I think those 3 running backs are at least live to go late round 2, probably more round 3. But I think Neal could go round 2 in particular. And Sampson. I think Sampson's pretty live to go round 2. Scatabo's probably more round 3. But those 3 running backs are pretty interesting as well in terms of like taking over backfields by the end of the year. And I think pretty strong bets to at least be early round 4 at the worst.
And getting pretty major discounts relative to these guys. 50 plus discount on Cam, 60 plus on Neal there. We're looking at pick 120, 128, where like the opportunity cost in that range is almost nil. Yeah.
I think all those guys are targets as well. Sampson, I wasn't as high on. Like he's a little smaller, but I've kind of come around. I'm actually up to 27% now on Sampson because he's so cheap. Devin Neal, I'm at 13%, was hammering early. He got kind of expensive. Davis has been talking him up a bunch for good reason. Scatabo, I'm at 18%. So that next tier, because there's such a discount for those guys, and I do think there's some upside to go round 2, but there's also upside to go round 3 in a really good situation. Like,
yeah.
When we come out of the draft, there's a round 2 running back who lands in an unfortunate situation, and then Devin Neal is basically the only investment that the Raiders made in running back offseason. Who's going to go higher? like Caleb Johnson behind an established starter, or Devin Neal as the backfield in Las Vegas? Like obviously Neal. So I think investing in that next tier makes sense too. And those are pretty good prospects as well. Like they're not amazing prospects, but all 3 of those guys rate pretty well for me.
Yeah. And it is, you do start to get into that territory. Like I'm thinking about Bucky Irving, and obviously he's an easy one to pinpoint, but I mean, like he was free all draft season last year, 4th round draft capital. So that's definitely different than if you get a 3rd round draft capital, but it was like even not that big of a roadblock to taking the job, which he did. It's still, he was free all summer. So that's the other thing too. It's like these prices look good, but you're also like, are they actually going to get that much more expensive? Like if they are in a timeshare?
Yeah, it's a good point. You're hoping to hit the landing spot nuts. And then if you don't, you probably overpaid. But you overpaid at a price where you could still have them easily pay off the ADP. So your CLV sucks, but like if you paid a 12th round pick for Bucky Irving last year, okay, that's sick. You know?
Well, in the other counterpoint, like in favor of taking these guys at cost, is the players around them have just as much job risk and failure risk as they do.
For sure.
In the way that post NFL draft, like that clarity works in favor of the veterans. Whereas like, man, bombs can go off here for these guys.
And will go off. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's do a little piss boying here. I tried to do a pronunciation workshop on this guy on a portfolio review a couple weeks ago. They told me to just call him,
say
Big Mac. What is it?
Just say Tet. Just say Tet.
Tet. Yeah, that was the suggestion here.
Tet McMillan.
You'll have to tune into ADP
Tetairoa, I believe, is the way you say it. Tetairoa McMillan. The other thing is go fast. Go fast. Tetairoa.
Yeah, that was my strategy. Tetairoa McMillan. I wanted to make him Japanese and an Italian when I took it.
I believe he's Hawaiian.
Talk to us about Tet here. Every one of the lowest here is pick 17 in a lot of T10s here.
Yeah, I didn't include Travis Hunter because the landing spots are kind of boring. They're the same ones over and over typically. I mean, you will see like him falling a little bit sometimes, but it's mostly, he's going top 3, top 4 at the worst. And I don't know if he's going to play receiver. It sounds most likely to play cornerback with like a receiver package, but obviously depends on where he goes. But he's kind of pretty locked in as one of the top like 4-ish players in the draft, or top 2 non-quarterbacks. And so Tetairoa McMillan is kind of your wide receiver 1, from that lens. And yeah, he's often mocked in that kind of like 7 to 17 range. I don't think we're going to see a ton of the Dane Brugler, he goes 4th to the Patriots. I just haven't seen much of that since then. And Brugler's mock is a little older. It seems like more likely that like they might go like Mason Graham, D tackle, or maybe cornerback, or even offensive line at 4, as opposed to taking McMillan that high. But obviously it'd be fun if he gets put in as Drake May's number 1, and he's a big-bodied receiver, but he's like a tactician as far as kind of intermediate route running. Doesn't get a ton of separation deep, but a guy like May would be like pretty fun for him. A guy like Burrow here, Zerline's mock draft destination, that would be pretty fun. But man, I mean, you see with him there's like some spots where you're like not that excited. I like him as a prospect, and so I am drafting Tet, but this one does make you think about, man, if he goes to the Jets and they haven't figured out quarterback, or to the Saints, or even the Cardinals isn't very enticing, like, because he's supposed to be a guy who kind of racks up targets. I'd love him on the Bengals. I'd love him on the Patriots. The Panthers,
I think Panthers
would be sneaky good. Yeah. I think Panthers would be good, but there are kind of some spots where you're, at the very least, I think he would probably dip an ADP.
Yeah. 49.1. So he's sandwiched in between Rome and DK Metcalf. There's a couple of the veterans, Metcalf, Adams. And then you actually have some interesting decisions. Like I think we talked about it a little bit last week, but did you say you guys have like Olave and Pickens ahead of him, I'm guessing, in your ranks?
We don't.
You don't? Okay.
We have, I believe we don't. Let's see. We've got McMillan we have in like the 40s, and those guys are more like 50s or even 60s.
Okay.
So let's see. Let me pull up McMillan. McMillan comes out of 42 for us, which is like 5 spots ahead of ADP. No, yeah, I'm drafting him. I'm pretty into him. And yet, like Olave's 48, Pickens 51. So yeah, not 60s, but more like late 40s, early 50s for those guys.
And it does feel kind of comparable to what we were just talking about with some of those running backs, right, in the landing spot. Like if you hit the landing spot nuts on one of these, like if you get the Bengals, or I would argue the Panthers, like you're probably doing cartwheels at that price. Whereas his ADP probably drops a round and a half or 2 rounds if he ends up, in one of these other ones.
Probably, but it is like wide receiver landing spot is, you don't want to, it'd be more like draft capital. Like I think if he were to go 16 to the Cardinals, one of the red flags there was that he went 16th. Like he was a guy kind of, so by that logic, we should probably not get too worked up if he goes 7 to the Jets, right? Like he might be their wide receiver 1 by the end of the year, and that's no disrespect to Garrett Wilson, but this guy just went 7th overall and is a pretty good prospect. So by the end of the season, maybe he is kind of the guy who, he's just like so reliable on these intermediate routes because he's huge and he's a good route runner, and he just kind of takes over. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I do want to see where the NFL comes in on him draft capital wise, because he's kind of held up as like a Drake London. Like that's like the style of player, and that when it works, but it also could not work. Like you need to, it's like he's winning with like savvy intermediate route running, but like how exactly savvy is he? Because he's not super explosive.
Because that's like the thing we were able to tell ourselves with Neighbors, and he had that big, kind of production dip in the middle of the season. But every single given week, you could still tell yourself, Yak, red zone monster. Like he
Yeah.
always had outs to a monster game just because he's such an insane talent. And it seems like a guy like Tet is just a notch below that, in that you're not going to always necessarily have that out.
No, he is more like London, where it's like target accumulation and it's good after the catch. But he's not like a Neighbors level, like, oh my God, like look at this guy go. Just like physically, that's not who he is.
Yep. All right, that one will be in it. And I also do wonder, like, how much of this ADP, because we know that the underdog market loves rookie wide receivers. They're very content to draft these guys highly. I wonder how much of it is like you touch the hot stove of Marv at the 1-2 turn. You didn't get your Malik Neighbors team to the finals to even enjoy him going off. Maybe I just wait to grab this guy until the 5th round instead.
Yeah, but I think he is a really strong prospect. Like I like him more than Rome Odunze, for example. And Odunze was going in the 5th round in a pretty rough spot for his ability to earn targets. So where there's potential for him to like be a target dominant number 1 out of the gate, and you're getting him in the 40s. Obviously that might not happen, but room to the upside for sure. There's room to the downside. I think he could end up being more like late 5th round, early 6th round. But like, man, JSN with Lockett and Metcalf was like, 5-6 turn that year.
Yeah.
I don't think he falls past that, even if it's kind of a bad landing spot.
It's interesting thinking about both the one thing JSN and Rome. I felt like the enthusiasm for them pre-draft as prospects was really high. And maybe I'm just not as plugged in right now, but it was like with the JSN thing, like we had convinced ourselves, hey, he's going to go top 10 or whatever. And then he just kept slipping. And it was like, I don't want to let go of my prior that he's a top 10 talent.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think Ted has been a little bit less there's like less excitement around him than I thought maybe there would be when I was like first digging into the class. But it reminds me a little bit of London again, where like London was drafted really high. I think was he the number 1 wide receiver drafted in that class? I think he was. And
he was top 10. Yeah.
Yeah. Number 8 maybe. And he, it wasn't like we weren't as excited. I mean, I was excited about Burks. There's, people more were excited about Garrett Wilson. But, London never like, I don't know, it didn't capture the imagination, it seemed like. And there's like a little bit of that with Ted. Also, he might not go as high as we think. Like that's like what I'm trying to gauge is like, is this number 4? Is he like closer to this number 4 or closer to this number 17? I think he's probably closer to the number 17.
Yeah.
In terms of where he ends up going. But I don't think he falls out of the 1st round or anything. I don't think there's that risk. But I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up going like 20th or something and fell much further than people initially thought.
All right. We got our next guy here, Luther Burden, who I believe, is the next wide receiver off the board in underdog drafts as well. ADP of 72. Pretty tightly clustered range here. 9 on the high end to the Saints, 25 to the Texans as the floor with these mock draft screenshots here. You are asking the question as Davis said, Pat Crane loves graphic design. It's his passion here in the bottom right. Says possible he falls to round 2.
I do like that. I like, I haven't made any thumbnails in a while, but I do like that I could bring back these like janky-ass slides. You see like, man, the game has not gotten much better.
No, but, it's very helpful. I'm literally not shaming any of it because I like having the slides and it's nice for the show. So thank you for making that.
Of course. No, I enjoy the shittiness is sort of part of the fun for me. Burden is like the first guy where I'm going to be kind of like, I don't think he's a bad pick where he's going, but I don't think he's like a screaming target or even necessarily like a big time, like, I'm neutral. I'm kind of neutral where he's going. The ADP is 72. We're at 71 in the leg up rankings. But the thing with Burden is his usage at Missouri. He's a big time prospect, big time recruit. Goes to Missouri. He's coming out as an early declare. He probably will go 1st round. He was productive there at Missouri. And so you're like, awesome. like this is kind of the profile. But a lot of his usage was kind of gadgety. He's really good at after the catch, but it's kind of like, how is he getting the ball in the first place? I'm excited to see what like Matt Harmon thinks about him with the route running, because that's like a big part of the puzzle for me. Is this guy like, is he going to win as a real receiver? Because he didn't really get like, a lot of his yards were kind of gadgety at Missouri, and I know people have criticized the Missouri offense, and that might say more about Missouri than it does about Burden. But one thing that makes me a little bit nervous about him is that initially you were seeing him mocked very high, and like the PFF big board still has him very high. And here you see Max Chadwick at PFF had him 9th to the Saints. But you don't always see him go in the first round of these mocks. He wasn't in who was it? Was it maybe Kuiper left him out of his mock in the first round? Mm-hmm. Someone had left him out of the mocks that I was looking at, and I think he goes first round, but I don't know that he's like a full-blown lock to go first round. And as a second round receiver, I would still be pretty interested in him, but it's like a little shakier with him, where you're like, is he this really high upside first round pick, or is he an underachieving second rounder where you start to like worry a little bit more about the floor? But he's priced in the early 70s, and I think he's fine there. I think he's fine.
Right, because there is like a pretty big difference generally how the market prices a player who goes, say, mid first round compared to late first round, early second. Like last year, we had that group of players, the Ladd, the Keon Coleman, the Brian Thomas, who were all kind of clumped together around this ADP of 72. Whereas like if he goes in the
Ladd
teens,
needed the landing spot.
Ladd needed the landing spot. Yeah. But like the market will be excited about a receiver if he goes, top 12 or top 15 in a way that I think this would probably be a discount. And then to your point, if he slides in the draft landing spot isn't as good, then you might be looking at like 30 picks of bad CLV.
Yeah. And I don't want to overthink Burden, because he was a really productive early declare who was like super high pedigree coming in to Missouri. And, as long as like, and I think he'll test well as well. He's like an explosive player. So if he solidifies the original expected draft position, I think you're going to feel pretty good about getting him where he's going. But it's just, there's a wider range of outcomes with him in terms of what his draft capital is.
Yeah. I would say these first two, Cowboys and Texans, I would at that price or draft capital and those landing spots, I think you get pretty excited about him.
Definitely.
All right, let's keep this moving so we can hit on a bunch of these here. Help me out with the pronunciation here too.
Emeka
Egbuka. Let's see. The range here is a little tighter, actually really tight.
It's the Steelers.
Everyone says he's going to the Steelers. So this is the equivalent of who was it last year? Jonathan Brooks going to the Cowboys. It's just a done deal.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it was just very funny. Just four of these guys, and in some cases when they were duplicates, I just left him off. But I just found this one very funny that every 4 of the 6 have him to the Steelers. Pick 21. He's more of like kind of good route runner, solid, reliable, number 2 type of guy. But if he were to go to the Texans, I think that'd be really fun. Commanders, I think would be really fun. Like kind of like a professional wide receiver out of the gate is sort of like what you're expecting from him. A little less boom bust in that way than a guy like Burden.
I'm a little triggered when you say he's a professional wide receiver out of the gate, because I believe that was the talking point for Jalen Polk.
I believe I said that about Jalen Polk. Yeah. I think I also said that about Ladd in my defense,
yeah.
But
that's true. Lots of professionals at range of outcomes.
This is a real professional. But yeah, I mean, but it is a little bit of a lower ceiling play, I think. It's always a little tricky to say that, because like if he earns targets, and maybe he ends up in a situation where he can earn a lot of them. But not like super explosive, not wasn't really the number one. He kept being like passed by people at Ohio State. But very reliable, solid wide receiver. He has an ADP of 78, and we're a little ahead of that. Not like a smash by any means, but I'll be like, oh, I'm going to get Burden in this draft, and he'll go the pick before, and then I'll take Egbuka like right after. So,
Okay.
And I think he makes sense where he's going.
Yeah, I mean, his ADP at 72, right ahead of him, like you said, is Burden's a few picks ahead. Then you got Ridley, Ayuk, then you got Egbuka, and then you got our guy Jalen McMillan, Shakir, Jawan Jennings there. I guess like McMillan versus some of these guys, Burden and Egbuka, is kind of an interesting thing, just being like what we saw from McMillan at the end. Second year breakout. Who would you rather prefer of the rookies versus McMillan?
It tends to be a little bit more like what the team needs, but I'm probably going with the rookies over McMillan. If Godwin doesn't come back, then maybe that changes, but there's a chance that they just bring Godwin back, and now you're like wide receiver 3 on the Bucks. McMillan's really good, but I probably lean the rookies kind of for that home run swing element.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a pretty clear tier break after that. Like once you're getting to Shakir, Jennings, Jacoby, Downs, Pearsall, I feel like it's a lot of guys where you know what you're going to get from them. And the ceiling is probably a little lower than what the high end range for some of these rookies would be.
Yeah. And I just think with McMillan, like I would like to know, we're actually like lower on McMillan because I think people are drafting kind of like Godwin's gone, and Godwin, they could just be like, you're a buck for life, and that would not be great for him. I would note Jeremiah did leave him out of round 1, so there's he's not like a total lock for round 1 either, but he's generally expected to go round 1.
And I mean, we have it a year. I feel like it's the same dynamic every year. Obviously, you have the best teams in the back end of the draft, and we kind of always tell ourselves like, hey, someone has to take him in this range, and then you'll always see, the one or two of those guys that fall to the second, like they did last year.
Mm-hmm.
Although, do you think the dynamic in general, because it isn't as strong as a class last year, that like maybe the people who do really want a wide receiver, like I don't just have a wealth of options, and I need to actually go out and get my guy earlier than I otherwise would?
I don't know, because I think it's a deep D-line class and pretty deep inside offensive line class. And guys where I think there will be guys where like people are excited about. Like this dude, Zayball, at the Senior Bowl, small school tackle who's going to have to kick inside to guard or center. Like they were like, I literally didn't see him lose a rep all day. Like this guy's insane. And he was like seen as like probably going to go 40s or 50s, and now he could go like 25 to the Texans instead. There's guys like that where you're like, yeah, you could easily see the teams that we think, oh, draft a receiver at the end of the first round, they're like running to the podium for a lineman on either side of the ball. So yeah, and it's not a terrible wide receiver class, just not as good as we've seen recently.
Yep. All right, let's head here. We got Matthew Golden. Apparently, the Steelers are just drafting all of the wide receivers with pick 21 here. But we do have one kind of spicy pick 12 here from Matt Miller going to the Cowboys. I'm guessing a pretty wide range here for Golden. There's also a 40 up here from Brugler to the Saints.
So Golden was a guy where you're like, hey, he's a round 2 receiver. Whereas like, Burden and Egbuka will go round 1, and then Golden's kind of in the mix with Trey Harris. They'll go round 2, except I've been pulling from 6 mocks here, and 5 of them have him in round 1. The other one has him going 40, and one of them has him going number 12 to the Cowboys, where he went ahead of the other 2 guys. He didn't go. Miller had Ted ahead, but then Golden's wide receiver 2 in that mock. Listening to like Todd McShay, he's just like, I love Matthew Golden. Like the route running, the ability to create separation, just jumps off the page or whatever. So, I mean, he's also an early declare. the production isn't there. He went to Houston, transfers to Texas, doesn't really emerge until kind of down the stretch. As far as production goes, never really broke out statistically. But I am intrigued by a guy who is now starting to have like a legit drumbeat of going first round. And again, the Brugler mock's, I believe, the oldest of these, and it's the only one that doesn't have him in the first round. So you're starting to see him climb into the same tier as Egbuka and Burden because of the draft capital. And I think it makes sense. Like, it makes sense to start being a little bit more aggressive about Golden. Now, Golden is pretty boom bust, and he's one where I would like take McMillan over him still, because he might not be that good. He might be like a really good, he might look great as a route runner at Texas, but generally guys produce when they're going to be really good NFL players, and he never produced. He is an early declare. I think that points to a high ceiling, especially if paired with round 1 draft capital because of his traits, right? Traits that get you round 1 draft capital, and it only took you 3 years to put them on tape. That's a high ceiling, but the floor, given the lack of production, is concerning. So, someone that I'm trying to draft a good amount of right now while he's still around to pick 100.
Yeah.
I think he's going to continue to move up. Like, I would not be surprised if I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he ultimately flipped Egbuka by the end of the big board. Easily could go mid 70s by the end of the big board.
Well, I remember last year it was the, not that they're comparable players necessarily, but the Xavier Worthy, it was like that Mendoza line of like, he was going at pick 100, and it was like just so clear that like the price was going to rise. Like, if the average of these landing spots is correct, like his price is going to rise from this. Like a lot. Yeah. Like a lot. Like he might be a 5th or 6th round pick. If he's a first round pick to the Cowboys or the Texans, like, yeah, he's going to rise a lot. To the Chargers, like, man. Yeah. What if they go to the Steelers and then they trade Pickens? He's not a 6th or 7th round pick. Yeah, I mean, the names he's going around, he's sandwiched between a bunch of veterans, Shaheed, Darnell Mooney, and then Golden. And then you have Kupp, Diggs, and Michael Pittman Jr. Right there. So Jimmy Golden, man. Yeah, he stands out there in a big way. He's a guy that I've been willing to push. I've gotten sniped on quarterback, right? I had McCaffrey, Debo, who probably gets traded, but still, and Juwan Jennings. And I'm like, I should probably take Purdy here, but I'm taking Matthew Golden. Then I immediately, like, next pick Purdy, taken by a guy who has no 49ers. Like, but it's a guy, at this point, I'm willing to get sniped to get more Golden. Yeah. All right. But I don't want to pay like too much. If he rises into the 70s and you're paying, like, this guy's good, this guy's got a floor. He doesn't really, I don't think, have a floor. He's got ceiling, but I do worry about the floor. There you go. Pack your Matthew Golden bags now. All right. Other wide receivers here. Now we are entering names that I have no reference points for here. So, Pat, walk us through the most exciting first round wide receivers. Yeah, so I kind of set up the Trey Harris thing of like, oh, Golden and Harris are kind of in a tier, and that was true for a while, and it was true in terms of the best ball ADP. But they're starting to separate both in best ball ADP and in real life kind of draft capital, where Harris is now down to 124.5 in the big board. So Golden has fully kind of formed his own tier aside from Harris. And Harris, you're just not seeing. I'm not seeing a lot of the Zerline, pick 30th. It's more the kind of late second round or not included in a 2-round mock. So it's just a little bit shakier for Harris, who's I believe 5th-year guy, incredibly efficient. He had over 5 yards per route run as a 5th-year senior, very productive, but doesn't get a lot of separation. He's like a giant yak guy, but he can't really separate. It's funny to see him mocked to the Bills because in some ways he's kind of Keon Coleman again. But he could. So I've definitely been drafting him, but
he's a lower floor guy, and given the way the draft capital seems to be not locked in, I said I've definitely drafted him. I took him in that FFPC draft. I actually have not drafted him in the big board, which I feel like is one of those things where I'm like, really, I've been drafting him, but I guess I have not. So he's been on my mind, but the only time I drafted him is that FFPC draft. And yeah, it's because I don't feel confident that he does go round 2. I think he probably does, but he could fall out of round 2. And at that point, he does start to look like very much a boom bust guy.
Yeah, it's funny you say the team doubling up, taking another Keon Coleman. And I saw someone in the chat earlier saying, like, why would the Steelers grab whoever? They just did Roman Wilson. And it's like, we have seen teams, like we just saw the Panthers like draft a near Jonathan Mingo clone, and Xavier Legette. Like they clearly have a type, and they're clearly also not necessarily going to have like a sunk cost fallacy with it. It's like if the dude busts, like the Steelers are not beholden to Roman Wilson. They will quickly move on and try to grab a better version of what they're looking for. So the teams having a type is always a funny dynamic.
That's true.
Any other, as far as like the prices on these guys, are you being really, price sensitive? Do you find any of these ADPs palatable or too frothy, or where are you at with that?
Well, the way I'm kind of thinking about it is you've got, after Golden, the odds that any of these guys go round 1 aren't very high. It's not impossible, but there's just not, we're more likely like psyched when they go round 2 because it means they didn't fall to round 3. That's kind of the next tier down after Golden. And Harris, I think, is the best of that group, but not by like a huge amount. And so you look at his ADP of 124.5 compared to Alec Iomanner, who's at 168. You look at Xavier Restrepo, who's very live to go round 2, I think, and unlikely to fall to day 3 because he's just like, he's probably going to play the slot at the NFL level, but he wins very consistently. He's kind of like the Ricky Pearsall, I think, of this year. Good route runner. Will probably have solid draft capital. He's at 153.5. Isaiah Bond, really kind of weird profile, but he should be very athletic. Probably kind of Mecole Hardman-y, but he could go second round.
No wonder
for
Davis
sure.
likes him. You had him at Mecole Hardman.
Yeah. No, I mean he could be like. Davis is probably right. Of all these guys, Bond probably has the best chance to go round 1 because of the athleticism that he might turn in. But look, I mean, he's going 146. I think that's fine. He's not overpriced. And then Jalen Royals had a really good Senior Bowl. He's at 177, and you see here he's mocked 59 to the Ravens. He's seen more as kind of the round 3 guy, I think, but. I do think he goes day 2. Jaden Higgins, big-bodied, kind of intermediate route. He's like a good route runner. He's kind of like I think he's kind of Jordan Matthews-y, where he could like earn targets pretty quickly. He's at 186 in ADP, and so part of the reason I haven't drafted Harris is because like I like this other group. I don't even like Iomanner that much as a prospect, but like at 168, he's frequently mocked in the second round. And he's also shown up in for the second round. You also have to go to the rankings, the big boards, and he's frequently ranked in the second round, I guess I should say. He's an early declare guy who was productive, and I have some questions about how he got there, but it's a good price. It's a really good price for him. Jack Besh was kind of seen as more of a day 3 guy, had an incredible Senior Bowl. He's live to go round 2 now. Jalen Noel is Jaden Higgins' teammate. Some people like him more than Jaden Higgins. I think he's live to go round 2, maybe more likely to go round 3. Tez Johnson is like 156 pounds. Literally, that's what he weighed in at the Senior Bowl. But just like crazy quick twitch. Should be like a fun slot receiver type. Probably round 3. I don't think it's impossible he goes round 2, though. He was uncoverable at the Senior Bowl. And then Savion Williams is like your kind of your Visca Corral Patterson type dude, but probably gets day 2 draft capital, so worth having on your radar. And his ADP is 202. So, you can, I think all of these guys right now Harris is a minor exception just because like you have to pay a little bit more of a premium, and I think he probably continues to fall if the draft capital doesn't, start to shape up a little bit better. But once you get down to the 150s or late 140s, where all these guys start going other than Harris, like sign me up. Like I'm into all these guys.
Yeah, I will say, like, looking at the ADP range of like where Bond and Restrepo go, like normally it's like in this range, there's just nothing. It's like the dustiest of players, and you're like, just give me the rookie every time. I will say, like, seeing Quentin Johnston, seeing Jalen Coker, seeing Cedric Tillman, seeing Tavian Wicks, like there's some interesting names in this range.
That's true. Yeah. And none of these guys are like crazy good prospects either. You're kind of betting that they're good enough and they get draft capital in a good landing spot. So that's a good point. I don't think any are like, oh my God, you gotta load up on this tier. Right. I think the guy I'm drafting right now the most is probably Golden, because I don't think the price stays. And the guy I'm comfiest taking is probably ultimately Tet, in the 40s. Yes. So, but yeah, this wide receiver class, we're betting on draft capital with a decent amount of these guys. And so when you're betting on draft capital, mix it up, right? We don't know who the NFL is ultimately going to like the most. So not having like a giant bag of Jalen Noel or something is probably a good idea.
All right, let's get to the tight ends here. Tyler Warren here looking like he is going to be a top 15 pick. Looks like the Colts are the Jets to Brock Bowers landing spot from last year as far as being the de jure location here. How
should be such a bummer, like going to the Colts would just kill to be in a
timeshare with Mo Alley Cox at pick 14.
Yeah. Will Mallory, Colin Granson. Yeah, he is beloved by the film guys. He's McShay. So you were hearing like, oh, I mean, honestly, like I don't see a difference between him and Bowers, and like I do from the numbers, like I do, but McShay was like, honestly, isn't he Gronk? Like, oh wow, okay, we're going to isn't he Gronk? There's love for Tyler Warren. He is not falling out of the first round. 14 might ultimately be his floor. He's going to start right away. He's a traditional tight end, really good blocker, good receiver. As far as like the rookie tight end narrative goes, we can, if it wasn't fully thrown away, we can throw it away completely for Tyler Warren. But people really like him in best ball. I don't think he's a smash. I think he's kind of fairly valued around pick 100. But, not someone I'm looking to fade. But it's just a little bit. Everyone's he's not under the radar for anybody. He's was a really great college player, a strong prospect. Draft capital's locked in. So
yeah. And it's almost like the inverse is what I was talking about, of touching the hot stove of the Marvin Harrison 1-2 round ADP with like a guy like Tet, in that now you're like, well, Brock Bowers, first tight end off the board, incredible prospect going around pick 100, and was the stone cold nuts at tight end. Yeah, I'll take another stab at that this year.
Yeah. But I mean, I think he's more like a Hawkinson or a, this people are gonna hate me for saying this name, but like just think of the archetype, not the skill level, but like a Cole Kmet level, not level. A Cole Kmet style.
A good prospect.
He was a good prospect, but like Tyler Warren's a much better prospect than Cole Kmet, but he's not. It's part of the excitement around Warren is the way he comes in as an NFL player and all the things he does, but he's not. Is he incredible after the catch? No, he's not. Bowers led the SEC in yak for 3 years in a row, not a tight end among all players. Like, that isn't difference-making receiver who has tight end eligibility. This is a really good tight end. It's a little different. He's more traditional as far as what he's bringing to the table. And from a fantasy lens, that it's not that it's bad. Like, Hawkinson is awesome, but it took a couple years for Hawkinson to start to become like a real fantasy force. So that's where I think he's a solid pick here at around pick 100. I don't have the same excitement for him taking over the position, the way we just saw from Bowers.
Yeah. Yep. I think, it's harder to see. And it's just going to feel, even Bowers wasn't able to survive like some truly horrendous quarterback play.
Yeah.
I think if he goes top 10 to the Panthers, that would start to be really interesting as far as like getting the draft capital plus a pretty nice spot. But yeah, it seems like there's a pretty wide range on how that could go for fantasy relative to Bowers.
Yeah, I think you do want Warren with a good quarterback, and like something like the Colts, I honestly think would be like a big, it would really damage his value, because it's like part of the reason they're going to like him is because he's an awesome run blocker. Well, they're going to run a lot. There's not, they have receivers who can earn targets. Like,
yeah,
is he gonna like dust Downs and Pittman as a rookie? Like, probably not. He'll be in the mix with those guys for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I honestly think there's some downside to his current ADP, or at least he doesn't jump out as, a big time target right now to me. He's fine. He's fine where he's going. I feel kind of neutral, sort of like Burden.
All right, we got our other kind of main top tight end here, although pretty big ADP gap. You're down to pick 150 with Colston Loveland here, but a ton of kind of mid to late or early 20s, I should say. Draft capital, looks like Broncos and Chargers are the two trendy landing spots for him right now in the first round.
I think Colston Loveland is a clear-cut target.
Okay.
He is more of a pass-catching tight end, but his draft capital is looking pretty locked in as kind of that later in the first round guy. But yeah, he gets mocked to the Broncos, to the Chargers. The landing spots get way better. Like Warren, might end up going higher in a worse landing spot. Loveland could end up kind of hitting the nuts in terms of landing spot and be like the secondary or maybe even primary weapon on, like, let's say on the Broncos down the stretch. He's a really good prospect. I think when you start to think about him as a prospect from a fantasy lens, I think he's on par with Warren. Now, is he as good of a real life tight end prospect? No. Warren's a better blocker. Colston Loveland had pretty poor run blocking grade over his career, which isn't great for fantasy because it means he might not always be on the field. But he's more of a receiver as well than Warren. So yeah, Sacrilegious nails it. It is the Kincaid Dulcich mold.
If they were good for the audio listeners there.
Yeah. But I think he's probably, it's probably a Kincaid again sort of situation where you're hoping it works this time. But he's a round one pass catching tight end, and you can get him pretty late.
Yeah.
I'm taking a lot of him.
The tight ends he's around in ADP. Kyle Pitts goes 5 picks before, and then 5 picks after. Cade Otton, Pat Freiermuth, Cole Kmet. It seems like at this draft capital, I don't want to say he's priced at his floor because we know the floor for rookie tight ends is incredibly low, but there's definitely a good chunk of upside at pick 150.
Big chunk of upside with this guy. And I think Warren is kind of stealing the hype a little bit, where like Warren's a great prospect. He's a lot to go first round. But Loveland is a great prospect who also looks like a lock to go first round, and he's basically a lock to go behind Warren, but who cares? Like, the team that drafts him isn't going to be like, let's use him less because we could have had Tyler Warren. Like, they're going to be happy to have this guy pick 20 or 22 or, hopefully one of those two, but maybe a little later than that. But he's going to be, someone that a team's very excited to add as a pass-catching weapon. So I think the floor-ceiling combo on him is pretty nice.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's our first sweep through the mock draft. Pat, thank you for pursuing your passion of graphic design to put those slides together for us. Yeah,
I'm thinking about spending some more time taking some PowerPoint courses and really getting these skills. When you recognize kind of a budding talent, you just you gotta stoke that fire. So.
Part of me to suggest maybe using an AI tool to help put these together for you, but part of me doesn't want to suggest that. So you can continue to pursue your passion.
No, that's, you know what, that is true. I'm truly a man of the people, where this was done by a person. As a person, I put these together. I screenshotted and then I dragged it over and then I changed the size and I moved them around. There was no AI used whatsoever. Maybe the Google template that I used to start was AI generated, but I don't know that. So let's say it wasn't.
There you go. When is the combine? Is that in 2 weeks?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
Let the people know. Obviously, we're referencing some of the leg up ranks. I have in my inbox that article from Daniel Raz about the running backs that I want to check out. What other things should people be looking out for?
Yeah, everyone should check out that article. That's a really good article for thinking through the range of outcomes on it. Changed my mind. There was ones where I was like, because I was talking to him as he was like kind of putting the analysis together. I was like, I don't know, man. Like, like, really, you have this guy bucketed here? And then I read the article. I was like, yeah, I think he's right. So the analysis is really good, and Daniel went through and kind of tried to figure out which teams are most likely to bring in a running back, and then talked about the existing backfields and kind of what would happen if they get hit with a running back landmine, who would survive that better than others, because obviously the talent of the existing guys matters there too. And yeah, put a lot of work into developing like a pretty rigorous methodology to try to like objectively dial this in a little bit. And honestly, just for like helping you think through the range on some of these guys, I think it's really valuable. So check that out. Also, yeah, big board rankings, got the big board sidekick, doing a monthly, dropped the monthly price for the big board sidekick down to $99, so people can check that out. And then, yeah, if you do the yearly, that covers, it's a calendar year, it covers big board, Best Ball Mania, playoff best ball. So a nice time to sign up for the yearly as well. But if you want to test it out, yeah, just $99 for now. So yeah, legendary upside. Got it all there.
Beautiful. As for me, tomorrow we'll have the show with the Badge Bros off and on the clock at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. We'll be building a bunch of Super Bowl pick'ems, our last, NFL slate specific show. You can tune in for that. And then Saturday night, if you're a member over on my YouTube channel, I'm going to do an after dark, just build some pick'ems, build some showdown teams on the eve of the Super Bowl if you want to hang out for that. And who knows, we'll figure out what we're going to cook up for next week. Maybe I will pop my drafting cherry. If you guys ever have suggestions for stuff that you'd like to see on the show or show ideas, let us know in the comments or hop in the Discord. And if you guys are listening to this on the audio version, definitely please come over to the YouTube side and subscribe when you get a chance. And yeah, Pat and I will be here every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. If you guys are new around here, feeling the whiplash of the nighttime starts afternoon, we are back into off-season mode, which is going to be on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. Appreciate everyone hanging out in the chat. Go check out Leg Up, and we will see you guys next time on Ship Chasing.